Hello, hi, what's up? It's me, Karen, your favorite booktuber, and I think someone gave me the nuzzer in April because I only read 5 books. And I know what you're thinking, 5 books is still better than 0. A book read is a book read, and that's true. I do like that I read some books in April, but I wish I'd read more because I really wanted to read and I just wasn't in the mood. And the mood is fickle, and sometimes we need to discipline the mood. Regardless, I'm gonna just dive right into the books that I read. The first book that I read was Simpatía. This was the final international booker, long-listed book that I read. If you want more thoughts on international booker, I made a whole entire dedicated video about it. Check it out. Focusing our attention back onto Simpatía. This was an interesting book because it combines quite disparate elements. We have lots of mention of The Godfather, a dog sanctuary, Venezuela, and some really bad sex writing combined together to give us a story of our narrator who is in an unhappy marriage. His wife leaves him on the first page, and his father-in-law recently dies quite quickly into the book. Not a spoiler, like it happens really early days. And in his will, he doesn't talk to his 2 other kids, but in his will, he basically bequeaths the house and the apartment to the son and gives him the mission that the apartment will be his if he turns the family house into a dog sanctuary, because at this time, considering the political climate in Venezuela, so many people are leaving the country. They are going abroad and abandoning their dogs. The father-in-law has quite an attachment to dogs because of some past familial trauma, which we end up finding out about kind of towards the middle of the end of the book. And that's his mission. But he himself, the narrator, is obsessed with the love of his life who comes in and out of his life, very manic pixie eagle vibes. So as a result of that, he's not really the best. He's not very well equipped to do this job. Luckily, thankfully, there are 2 vets who come into the picture and help him out, and they manage to do the work that he is not doing because he just watches a lot of movies and thinks about and also has sex with the manic pixie e-girl. So that's kind of what's going on in this story. I would say that one of the things that I did find quite interesting that I didn't mention in that international booker long listed video but really wanted to is that there is a lot of conversations around hunger in this book, which is it's an undercurrent or running through the book that I noticed, that there were references to how there's a security guard at the house and he's looks quite famished and ill and he hasn't had food in a while, so the protagonist gets him some food. And when the protagonist is chatting with a lawyer who is shady guy, there is a lot of descriptions around what they're eating and how lush the food is, and they're having steak and really just indulging. And I think that comparison of this really rich food versus the hunger that so many people were experiencing is quite interesting. And it is a book that it's really hard to just pin your finger on it because there's some interesting things happening, but also it's quite random. It's a very interesting book, and I don't really think it's for everyone. I think if you're someone who is quite sensitive to reading about dogs, I don't think this would be for you. After that, I read a nonfiction book that was really fascinating that I thoroughly enjoyed. It has a longer title. Let me pull that up for you. Pockets: An Intimate History of the Things We Keep Close. This is a deep dive into the humble pocket, which is something that I wouldn't have thought we should all read, but we should all read this book. If you have ever, if you're a female or you have many female friends, you probably at least once in your life encountered them saying, "And can you believe this dress has pockets?" Or "Can you believe this has pockets?" Or "Isn't it so great this has pockets? I just really love the pockets in this." That is a discourse that comes up quite often in my life, in the lives of others, I'm sure. And this book is looking at pockets, why it is that women's clothes often don't have pockets. Why is it that in 2024, if women's clothes even do have pockets, why are their pockets more narrow and smaller than those of their male counterparts? And our author goes back in time to the conception conception, yeah, of the pocket, and takes us back in time when there were no pockets and everyone, regardless of gender, were basically walking around carrying cloth purses. And she's giving us examples. She's talking us through how, you know, women would wear it underneath the dress, like they would have their cloth purse, and there's like some interesting imagery of the cloth purses. And I mentioned this imagery because initially I read this book on audio and I like devoured it. I kind of want to reread it because I think towards the end, like I was kind of rushing a little bit since I had to return to the library quite fast. But because I really enjoyed this book, I actually went to the bookstores, like looked across the whole entire state to find where it was. I think there's only one really in my area. And I like thumbed through the images and I sat there and I like read all the captions for half the images because I wasn't able to finish all of them because I had to run to dinner, blah, 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 who cares? I think I need to buy this book is basically what I'm trying to say. Anyways, the images like just pair so well with the examples, and there's a lot of like historical paintings that you can look at and learn a lot about pocket history. Tangent aside, going back to it, we start off with a cloth purse and we're learning about that, and then we get into the introduction of the pocket, which occurs first in men's clothing, and we see how I don't know how to shift into gears, but basically one of the things that I do want to mention is that we also learn about how the three-piece suit, which is kind of emblematic of Western menswear clothing, does not come from the West. It has its origins in the East. It is a borrowed form, and you can see a historical precedent for the suit in Turkish attire, Persian, Central Asia, and that just like tidbit blew my mind. I was fascinated by that fact, and I wanted to share that with you guys. And I would say that the history of the pocket, we learned things about how there was a lot of laws being made about the pocket and men having pockets, because within a pocket you could hide a gun, and that was quite problematic. And so you hear that kind of knowledge, then you get fast forward a little bit and you see how pockets become an interesting division between girls' clothing and boys' clothing, like little kids. And you see how there's a lot of this like lore of the little boy's pocket and the things that are found in it, and how when they're out into the world and doing whatever little boys do, very like boys will be boys kind of energy, their pockets are filled with all of these like treasures that they find, sticks, rocks, paper, whatever it may be. And you know, there's literature about how parents shouldn't go through little boys' pockets, that it is bad to do so and you're infringing upon them and their freedoms and their liberties. And like then there's discourse about how in a boy's pockets, like you can find out a little bit about what they're going to be like as an adult, and like there's so much discourse happening, yet girls' pockets, not a thing, nothing. And I just thought there were so many fascinating things to learn. And then our author also includes like a more recent day experience of, I think in the early 2000s, maybe, or maybe even late 2000s, who knows. There is still a lack of pockets in little girls' clothing. And there's this one little girl who like petitioned, basically sent a letter to whoever was making her clothes and was just like, girls need pockets too. I have things I want to carry that I need pockets for. And it's just like really makes you question, like just pockets are something that I doubt many of us are really like actively sitting around thinking about. But there's a really rich history, and you know, just I keep on saying discourse for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe I've been online too much, but yeah, I definitely have. But there's just so much to like parse and learn about, and I would say check out this book. It is kind of under that umbrella of fashion books that I wanted to read, in the sense that earlier in the year I said I wanted to read 6 fashion books. I think this is maybe my second one that I read this year, and I would have to say, even if you don't have an interest in fashion, if you don't have an interest in pockets, you should still check this out because there's so much cool history and a lot going on. I'm going to wrap that up and we're going to move on to the next book. The next book that I read was also nonfiction. This was The Sister, North Korea's Kim Yo-jong, the most dangerous woman in the world. Fascinating book. This is a book that is looking, so okay, let me start off by saying this. the book is titled The Sister, right? So you would expect it to be entirely focused on the sister. That is not what you get, and I think it's kind of a hard thing to do because there's so little that we really know about North Korea's political structure. Like it's hard to learn things about that country for various reasons, and this book sets the stage by actually deep diving into the family history, and we go back in time and we're finding out about the grandfather and all of these things to really get a more fuller picture, a more clear picture about the sister and what it would mean, what it basically means that she is the second most powerful person in that country. And there's a lot of discussion around optics and how it is that North Korea is able to get so much money from the States and South Korea and has managed to kind of extort the world. And yeah, let's dive into it. The author basically presents a picture that there are 3 major secrets that the North Korean people aren't really privy to, and if they were to know that, would kind of shake the supreme leader's power and control. Those secrets are, and I'm going to read them to you because I don't want to mess up the details, and I do think that they're interesting because it's kind of learning about these secrets, like the author spends a lot of time telling us this. So the 3 secrets are, first of all, that Kim Yo-jung and Kim Jong-un's mother was actually born in Japan. She was not born in Korea at all. The second one is that one of their aunts defected to the US in 1998. And the third secret is that Kim Il-sung's parents were Christians. So those are kind of the 3 important secrets. As I said them to you, the gravitas of them was probably not that great, but like, go with me, run with me. And so once we get there, we also start to see, the author walks us through how the sister was introduced into the public consciousness. It was very deliberate, and for a long time, people didn't really know her name, and the author is like tracking all of this, getting it to a point where we can see how and why the sister is now so prominent, and we're able to see that, you know, everyone else in the country might not, even the other political elite, I guess you could say, they don't have power in the way that she does. Her and her brother, they are equals, which is quite fascinating. And so we also then see, it's like hard to talk about this because I don't want to mess anything up because this is serious stuff. One of the more interesting things about this book was actually, there's a lot of interesting things, but one of the interesting things for me was kind of helped me understand like optics in a better way. Like a lot of this politicking that is occurring between North Korea, South Korea, North Korea, and the States is very much so considered around optics. When a photo is taken, is someone smiling? Are they not smiling? What does that mean? How are they standing? And I just thought it was quite fascinating that still in this day and age, like optics, as in the photographs that are taken, what that means, is more important than the actual conversations that are had behind closed doors and promises that are made, because actually those things are quite empty and we really haven't made like very many inroads. And it's also just one of those books that helps. While I was reading it, I was wondering, like, how does one tackle a country like this? How does one embark on relations with them when often, you know, things are quite volatile, and, you know, if you mess up, things could go quite bad. And I was like thinking about what that would look like and what that would be like and what I would do if I was in a position of power, because we see that, as the author makes the case, that we have gotten into a relationship, the world has gotten into a relationship with North Korea where they lash out and lash out and lash out, and we actually give them money quite often. And I think that was just a really eye-opening reading experience for me to just like see that relationship. And then part of that is also learning about how propaganda works in this country, and it really helped elucidate to me that propaganda is so important in maintaining control in this kind of political structure. And I think that it was something that like was tough to grapple with, but also quite interesting, though there were like occasionally times where I was like taken out of it just a little bit. Like I wanted more, like, but it's hard to get more because, you know, access is not easy in this regards, and it's quite tough for presidents to interact with a country like this where the people in power are in power for life. And then the final thing I wanted to say is that towards the end we see more about the sister. We see Kim Yo-jong and how the South Korean population reacts to her and finds her to be like a fashion icon. And yes, she does have great cheekbones, but then we also see her, because she has quite a high position in the like government propaganda system, where she is able to, you know, send out these tweets. I don't know if she's actually tweeting, but press releases, whatever it may be. And so the author would read out, I did this on audiobook, so the narrator would read out some of the things she would say about like US leaders, South Korean leaders, and you know, you shouldn't laugh, but they were quite funny. Like, it's wild, some of the things that were said, and it's kind of just, it's like, it is, those are some insults. She's got some insults up there. And that's all I'm going to say about that book. I guess if you have any recommendations for like good North Korea books, let me know. I would be interested in checking them out. And then we switch gears and I go back in time. Well, not really back in time because it was historical fiction, but like, yes, back in time because I'm reading about Shogun. So, okay. If you haven't watched my reading updates, you don't know this, but I started watching Shogun, the television show, the most recent iteration of it, and was really enjoying it. I mean, I still am. I've just taken a pause midway through the penultimate episode. Need to get back to that at some point, but I was watching the show and just really enamored by it because I don't know if you guys could tell, I really like history, and I just find at the time of like in any part of the world where people are using swords to be fascinating. And so since I was enjoying the show and just really seeing also another thing that I like, not just swords, but also seeing a time and a place in history where, because there's no social media, there's no phones and baloney, no YouTube to watch, there are people, albeit a very small minority of the population, who are able to gain expertise in art in a way that is quite fascinating to me. To be a geisha, a courtesan. I also started watching like half the episode of Hira Mundi, but stopped because I wasn't really into the show. But I do find courtesans to be quite interesting. Just like the fact that in those cases, like these women are knowledgeable in all the arts. You know, they know how to dance, they know how to sing. There is an art in the case of geishas to like pouring tea that is very specific, and like really this exploration of rituals, which is, I think, it's something that in this day and age we don't really have as much. It's something that I would like to do a little bit more in my day. To, in some regards, I guess you could say I'm saying that I want to romanticize my life, but I just want to be way more intentional. And I think watching these things and just seeing that, like the very specific way of doing things, really fascinates me. And I think what's so interesting about Shogun, now I'm just like completely not even doing a wrap up, I'm just talking to talk. What I find so interesting about Shogun, the show, movie, this time in history, is that, but what I think one of the things that I find so interesting about Shogun, show, television, this time in history, is that honor and is so important. That is something that like we don't really see, I think, in other cultures as much, where, you know, saying something, like your word, really means something. And I just find that so fascinating. And I think what this book does, it is a book about Japan written by a white man, but moving on to the book, Shogun is, you can get it as one book, which is like 1,300 pages, or you get it as part 1 and part 2. I decided just to read part 1 because I wanted to like get my feet wet. Basically, while I was watching the show Shogun, I started reading reviews, like the New York Times reviews of it, and then somehow I found my way to Reddit, and once you find yourself on Reddit, all things go to hell, and I ended up reading some of the like threads, and people were really talking about the book and how the differences between the book and the show, and so I was like, let me just read the book. And I only managed part 1. I might go back to part 2. I know Books with Ryan did a really great video on it. I'll also link that. And he's kind of convinced me that maybe I should go back to part 2, but like, I don't know. I did end up reading all the Wikipedia page to find out like what's happening because I was so curious. But anyways, what the story of Shogun is. If I haven't even told you that, I have not told you that at all. Shogun is a story of this like British pilot. Pilot is something to do with ships. The stuff about the ships was really boring about me because I'm not that interested in like the sea really. Anyways, he is a pilot working for the Dutch, Portugal, and England, and everyone, I don't know, they're mad at each other. So our pilot is making his way to Japan because he wants to disrupt trade. Basically, Portugal has dominion over Japan. No one else can really go there, and since they have such like control over this part of the world, Japan doesn't know any other like foreigners. They only know the Portuguese. And our pilot comes through, and he has only like 10 other people on the crew because everyone else is gone. Everyone in his crew ends up being stuck in prison and their life sucks, but he is the chosen one. He has been selected to basically talk. I don't know. Well, let's. So he's selected because the people at the time are like, this is a sign because there's trouble in the country, and he could be a deciding factor because of his access to weapons, because he brought through his ship and also cannons. So they decide to take him because he's the leader, and he is getting introduced to Japanese culture, and he is finding it to be, I mean, it's wild. People in Japan are showering, taking a bath every single day, and he's like, you want me to take a bath every single day? I'm gonna catch a cold. But then he ends up acclimating, and he starts to really like the baths. Who doesn't like a bath? I love a bath. And he's like acclimating. He is, in the show, he's made to be like quite stupid. He's actually not as stupid in the book. He's actually quite clever and is able to acclimate quite easily and learn the language with like greater ease. And you see how he is trying to like get his bearing. And I think the book part 1 could have been edited. That's my major gripe. That's I think probably the main thing that's keeping me from reading part 2 is that I just think that the book could have been edited down just a little bit, because James Clavell, is that the author's name? He takes us through every character's like point of view and shifts in a way that's like a little awkward. I think I wasn't really impressed by the writing that much. But there's obviously, because we're going through everyone's like point of view, we're learning way more than we would through the show. And in that regards, it is worth reading to really see the level of manipulation and lies that people are doing. One of the ideas of the book and the show that is touched upon is this like 3 hearts. You have the heart that you like show the world, the heart you show your friends, and the heart that only you know, which is basically like big 3 in astrology. Sun, moon, rising. So you're like seeing that. And I think though, what's interesting about this is that though it is told through the lens of our pilot, whose name I've completely forgotten, maybe it's James, it is actually a story of Toranaga and how he is, shaking up the country. So I still haven't even really told you what he's about. Pilot comes through, the former shogun, who wasn't actually shogun because you could only be a shogun if you come from one of 3 family lines, and he was not that. He was a peasant boy who made it up the ranks. The shogun has died, and his son is not of age yet. So as a way to kind of maintain order in the country, there have been 5 regents, like a council of elders, who have been selected to rule until homie, little boy, is of age. And so of these 5 guys, there is one, Toranaga, who is quite powerful, and everyone is afraid of him, and especially this guy, his name starts with an I. He is trying to get Toranaga killed, And so that's kind of like the early setup for the book, for part 1 and also most of the show. And so you're seeing that happen. Been rambling a lot, so we'll move on to the next book. Let me know, actually, before we get there, if you've read Shogun and if you think I should read part 2. Let me know. Decide for me. I can't decide for myself. And then the final book that I read in the month of April was Brat. Shout out Penguin Press for sending me an ARC. I love a physical ARC. I have like 5 or 6 books from NetGalley on my Kindle that I still haven't read because just reading on my Kindle really overwhelms me for some reason. I just don't enjoy it. So I think I'm gonna have to stop requesting books on NetGalley. Publishers, if you're watching, please send me an actual physical ARC, please. I just can't read these books on the Kindle. Anyways, shout out Penguin Press because I really appreciated them sending me this book. I really liked it. It was a lot of fun. This is kind of autofiction, but not in a annoying way. This is the story of Gabriel, who is also the name of the author. So Gabriel in the book is a young man like in his late 20s, I think like Saturn return age, whose father has recently passed. His mother is in a care home and he has an older brother, and the older brother and the wife are rich and they want to sell the family home, and he is kind of struggling. He's the brat of the book because his girlfriend just left him, and obviously a parental figure has passed and his mother has dementia, which is quite, tough to deal with. And he is back home. He's promised to clean up the house so that they can sell it. But things are off. This is a very like gothic kind of story where the house is creepy. He finds a manuscript that his mother wrote, and every time he looks at it, the story changes. And he stumbles across a family video, which also reveals some things about his family that he had not known prior to this. While he's doing this, he's also drinking a lot, doing drugs. He comes across these 2 creepy siblings. Like, this is a horror story, but it is also, more importantly, a story of grief. And it's told in a really like staccato quality. There's a lot of repetition, very sharp sentences, vignette style that like just draws you along. And by the end of it, I was actually quite moved. I wasn't really expecting that because the humor, and there is a lot of humor in this, is very like internet humor, but not in a no one is talking about this kind of way, just in a very like irony pilled kind of capacity. Do you know what I mean? Like, I really liked it. That's that.